warning when you near the end of your allotted time. And with that said, I'll open citizen comments. Item 1 by inviting Michael Ward to the podium. Ms. Ward.
Good afternoon. You wouldn't let us talk on the charter, so we decided to come back. First of all, I've been watching.
But Ms. Ward, that's not true. We had two very open public hearings on the charter, and I think you were involved in those. They had lasted for more than an hour. Both of them did.
I don't want to use my 3 minutes on that, but nevertheless.
Well, I'm just clearing the record. That is not what you said is not accurate. Okay. And had we taken action on anything on the charter, there would have been public comment.
Oh, I know.
Okay.
But
I mean, come on. You know us the way we operate.
Hearings were before any proposals, but anyway, what I was wanting to comment on, I like the direction, watching all of the budget hearings so far, or budget discussions so far, of paying down a lot of the debt and cash funding a lot of the projects. So kudos to Mr. Atkinson on that and all of you. But I'm kind of curious how you've decided between which projects to put on the GO bonds for the votes and which projects you use COs for on the $28 million of those as well for COs. But of course, in the past, we've seen a lot of COs being used for a lot of things that probably should have gone to a vote of the public. This particular 175 almost $1 million street bond package is over a dozen projects on the November ballot, but that's almost 57 million more than the combined total of all the $117.9 million voter approved debt in the last 3 bond elections in 99, 2004, and 2009. A lot of other huge amounts of debt have been incurred for enormous projects like this building remodel. And they've been funded with the sales of certificates of obligation. And a lot of other revenue bonds, of course, were properly done with the utility, for utility projects as well. But my main concern on this is lumping all of the projects into one item, because as we've seen, sometime back, 2004, I guess, a lot of money was diverted from some updates on the auditorium and put into the Civic Center by councils back then. And by putting everything together, it's too easy to decide to put more money into one portion of it than something else. Also, a lot of debt has been rolling off, so I'm hoping that you can lessen the tax impact. And using part of the 2.25% property tax that goes to Market Lubbock would also help that and probably be a lot better for economic development and continuing to fund that. But that's another subject, so I'm interested in the work session today as well.
Thank you, Ms. Ward. Second citizen to speak is Burley Owen. Mr. Owen.
Before I get started, it seems like the speakers out here over the audience is not on. I had trouble hearing you. It seemed like just these speakers here on. I don't know whether you control those back there or not.
We'll check.
But I needed the volume for me to be up a little bit more.
We'll check on it, Mr. Owen. Thank you for letting us
That was
know.
yesterday. Okay, my concern is the amount of debt that the city of Lubbock has. According to your figures at the end of, or at the beginning of last year, we had $1.2 billion in debt. And that has apparently not changed. And Mr. Mayor, I recall when you first ran for office, you promised to reduce the debt. If it's a little less, it's very little less. And I saw some figures in the past few months, it indicates that it might have gone down a little bit, but it'd be just a few percentage points. But the latest information from the state comptroller's office, for example, shows total debt outstanding that Lubbock is the second highest, has the second highest debt of 9 other cities of comparable size. They list the debt per person, per capita, at $4,482. And I think that's in range with figures that you have. And also I think it's in range with figures I just got the last week or so from the state that says total debt service required per capita, $4,728 per person. So we're highest, and there are a lot of other cities, they're probably half of that. I don't know what the average is, but when we're in the highest one or two, and we have been for several years. To me, that's an indication we may be spending too much money. Now, I don't know where you cut. I think we're spending too much money on fancy projects and devoting time to that, such as for the city downtown park, for the studies to redo the Civic Center and double the size of that and spend about $90 million. I'm told that's on hold, but if it were not for COVID, that might be proceeding. And so it seems, as I told 2 council members out front, it seems like you always have something in your back pocket that you're going to pull out on us that requires more debt. So that's the end of my comments. I'm just concerned about the amount of money you're spending and then adding this a deal. And plus, there's a notice last week in the paper that you're going to issue $130 million worth of bonds. Part of that is refinancing bonds, but on behalf of LP&L. So there's another $130,000. Now, I agree, maybe half of that will be refunded, but what are you going to do with the money that you save in savings and interest? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Troy. Okay, that concludes citizen comments. Council will move to item 2 on the agenda today, and that's first readings. If it comes to the city secretary's office, it's an ordinance regarding first reading for calling a bond election to be held within the city of Lubbock, Texas, making provisions for the conduct and the giving of notice of election and containing other provisions related thereto. In order to begin our discussion, or before we begin our discussion, here are presentations, there a motion. Mr. Griffith?
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, move to approve.
Thank you, Mr. Griffith. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Massengale. Mr. Atkinson?
Thank you, Mayor, City Council. Today represents the action item coming forward to you after numerous opportunities for prior discussion beginning last year in your council priorities workshop, continuing through the designation of a future needs committee chaired by Councilmember Griffith, and also joining with Councilmember Patterson Harris and Councilmember Joy. We have a very brief presentation for you today. Would note that Mr. Ben Morris with ORIC, your bond counsel, is also here today if needed. So Ms. McCachran, if you would start us.
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council.
Afternoon, Jessica.
This slide here is a recap again of the recommendation coming to you from your Future Needs Committee. As you will recall, we talked to you on July 13th that the recommendation from the committee is to proceed with calling a bond election for general obligation bonds to cover these listed street projects that you see here before you. The total estimated cost of all of these projects is just under $174.6 million, and our recommendation is to to call a bond election for $174,575,000. We've talked about this several times, but this will be the first bond election since 2009. This is the map that you've seen numerous times showing all of the proposed project locations. As a reminder, the segments listed in red are those that are proposed with the bond election for street improvements. Those segments listed in green are arterial projects that are currently in progress. And those segments listed in blue are the arterial projects that have been completed within about the last 3 years. This is the financial model showing the impact of the general obligation debt. And again, I want to point out that the tax rate impact, the peak impact, would be a 2-cent increase above what our rate is today. And finally, as a reminder for the timeline, if you do call a bond election, Today is the first day that you can order a bond election, and it must be called no later than August 16th. So if you pass on first reading today, your second reading of this ordinance would be at next Tuesday's regular meeting on August 10th. The last day to register to vote in this election would be on October 4th. Your early voting period would be October 18th through October 29th. And then the final election day will be on November 2nd. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Okay, thank you, Ms. McCacken. Questions for staff? Okay, Jessica, don't go far. We
Thank
may
you.
very well may want you back. Let's open with the, oh, I'm sorry. We do have a question, Jessica. I'm sorry. Mr. Chavez has a question. I'm sorry, Juan. My apologies.
No, thank you, Mayor. Ms. Jessica, you mentioned it would be a 2-cent increase. Can you crush some numbers for us? What would that mean for, let's say, what average home, 150,000? What kind of increase would we be looking at? Or share some numbers with us. Go ahead, Mr.
I got you, sir.
Blue.
All right, so our average home, like we just presented a couple of days ago, did go up to about 168,000. So I did rerun the numbers on this, and that 2 cent isn't on a 2 cent all at once. So we kind of aligned the incremental changes over the 5 years that we're planning to issue this. So it is 2 cents total on the peak rate. That comes out on the average home that would affect over those 5 years by a little over $45, $46, which comes out to, if you average it out, about $9 per year, a little over $9.
About 75 cents a month.
Yes, just information for the public out there, because there's this misconception of taxes going up again. And when we put some money, some cents and dollars to it, it paints a good picture for the public. Thank you for the information.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chavez. Thank you, Mr. Koslich. Okay. Thanks, Jessica. We'll start with some discussion. I'll ask Mr. Griffith to make the first comments. Jeff?
Thank you, Mayor. This week during our budget hearings, budget meetings, I should say, one thing that was brought out is the growth of our city. The growth of this city makes me even more convinced that our recommendation of going forward with this citywide election is more important than ever. Not just the timing. Mr. Chavez, thank you for bringing up the tax consequences. The real deal is that we need to do it now because interest rates, municipal bonds are lower than ever, as Mr. Koslich has given us the data, but also this is about public safety. This is about mobility. And with the growth of this city, this is why we need to do this year. More convinced than ever. It's the right time, the right thing. Thank you.
Mr. Griffith, would you talk a little bit about the process that your committee has followed? I know this is, we started work on this after our planning meeting in November, but can you, and maybe we can get staff to help you a little bit, but just what you guys have done and the way you've undertaken this?
We started, Ms. Joy, Ms. Patterson Harris and I started November.
We started in early December. In fact, you actually met right up to the week of Christmas as a committee.
Thank you, Jarrett. The intent was to analyze, first of all, immediate needs. Those we have addressed by using, as brought out earlier, we have those with a fire station, access to new substation, patrol division. Thank you. Excuse me, Chief. The other thing is that $9 million worth of unpaved streets across our city that should have been done decades ago. So the three of us analyzed that first and came to council and recommended that we go ahead with those because those are truly immediate needs. The second part of our discussion was to begin analyzing arterials across the city. And as we've stated before, this is a citywide. It is very important that our citizens understand our needs are citywide. And with the growth of our city in all directions, and some of our thoroughfares, some of our needs are, or I should say arterials are aged and need that update. But others, as we've grown, we've outgrown our streets. But we truly believe during this process, as we analyzed each and every one of them, and we added to our list, if you noticed, during this process, if y'all remember. So we believe that these all are equally important. And that's why our recommendation is citywide. We don't have an A, B, C, and D. These are all equally important to our entire city.
Thank you, Mr. Griffith. Council, before we open it up to other members of the Future Needs Committee, do you have any questions for Mr. Griffith? Okay, Ms. Joy, you have anything you'd like to add?
One item that we utilized, if you will remember, we had a streets committee, and that was Mr. Chavez and Mr. Christian and Mr. Griffith. They went out and drove every street in the city of Lubbock. And if you haven't done that, then don't criticize, because there's some of them that you get on, you'll wish you'd never seen before. So they did all that driving and they came back with all that information. And instead of just putting on the shelf like we do sometimes, we took it and we used it to start our discussions. And we ranked the projects. And some of that ranking came from information that had been provided to us because I believe, Mr. Franklin, we actually had someone to come in, an outside source, not our people, an outside source to come in and say, this one, this one, this one, and this one. So that's how we got started on this. It wasn't done in the dark. It wasn't done without information, without knowledge. And if we didn't know for sure, we got in our cars and we drove. So that's how this all came about. And we would not be here today able to do what we're recommending had it not been for that streets committee, because they drove every street in the city of Lubbock.
Thank you, Ms. Joy. Ms. Patterson Harris.
Thank you. I'm going to be brutally honest, since you've allowed me to say my piece. The temptation to jump up and down and point toward District 2 was huge. But after continuing to drive the city on my own, as I do quite often, I recognize that there are other areas that were just as needy in these areas, and that it was important to make sure that we focused on every area of the city and impact all the citizens in some manner as we made the decisions. Because, I mean, to Ms. Ward's question, there's so much that was needed. There's so much. And I thought just, me and my little corner driving around as I did on occasion, my eyes were open. But as I continue to spread myself out and see, there are just things that need to be done. There are things that as a city, we did not take care of. And I would that as we look to this position and move this thing forward, I want us to make sure that we are in the frame of mind of making sure that we do a good job of taking care of the things that we have. It's important so we don't find ourselves in such a, for lack of a better term, jacked up position again. So I get it, Ms. Ward, but I just want you to know, I'm gonna stand up so you can see that it was just a matter of really looking at things that really really needed to be done. And we began to prioritize, man, the priority list was like straight across. There wasn't one that we really found that was more important than the other. They were all important because they impact the citizens of this city, which is important. So I just want to say that the temptation was there. I was going to go in there and say all of mine. But of course, try not to be selfish and taking all citizens of this city into mind. I think this is where we are. And these are important pieces, I believe. There are more, there are others. But what we can do now and call upon folks to put the work in, this is what we have. And I'm not ashamed at all. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Patterson Harris. Mr. Griffith, you have another comment?
One other thing I'd like to say, be remiss. I truly appreciate Ms. Joy and Ms. Patterson Harris because, as Sheila just stated, we took our hats off and looked citywide, and these two ladies, I mean, they'll make you work. Both of them. So I appreciate both of them very much. I appreciate Mr. Atkinson, appreciate Public Works and all the efforts that have been put into this to make sure we brought the right recommendation forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Griffith. Mr. Massengill.
Thank you, Mayor. First, just let me thank the committee, Mr. Griffith, Ms. Joy, Ms. Patterson Harris. I obviously wasn't in their meetings, but I was aware of how many meetings they had. They did a tremendous amount of work on this and put in probably hundreds of hours of time to determine what the list would look like that would be on this road bond. So let me give a little bit of a history lesson here. We haven't, as a community, voted on a road bond since 2009. And when we voted on that bond as a community, there were 4 propositions. One is the streets were all on there together. We had fire projects on there, and then we had, if you'll recall, splash pads, and we had soccer facilities. And 2 of those items passed, which were related to fire rescue and streets. Now in 2009, the streets that we decided to work on as a community were 34th Street, University to Avenue Q, and Indiana to University. We're all familiar with that stretch and the impact that has had. Quaker Avenue, 98th Street to 114th Street. We're all very familiar with that road and the impact that that has had. 114th Street, University Avenue to Slide Road. That was construction as we know 114th Street today, and we know what a great need there is to build 114th Street out to 5 lanes. And then finally, Milwaukee to 98th included on 114th. Now, the tax impact in 2009 was about 2 cents. And the totality of that project was a little over $50 million. Today's proposed project is $175 million and a 2 cent impact. I believe the list that your work resulted in is a great list. It'll have a significant impact to our community. My hope is that this is successful, is that our citizens support it, and that we're able to do this as a community in another 4, 5, or 6 years and not wait as long as we did on this one. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Massengill. Mr. Chavez.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Griffith, SPH, Ms. Joy, job well done. It's appreciated. Looking at the recommended bond election, arterial streets, And I know the answer to this, but I think it merits some explanation to the public because I have been asked about North University between Marcia Sharp and Clovis Road. And when this list comes out, the first question is going to be, where's North University? And Mr. Jarrett, what say you?
Wow, that's a great lead. North University from Marcia Sharp Freeway to Clovis Road is in your proposed fiscal year 22 budget, the budget you'll be looking at here in just a few moments. Two things I think are of note on that. Number one, that's a partnership project. Lubbock County has committed to funding roughly 1/2 of that and the city's 1/2. That is a project that we are funding next year in cash and your street maintenance budget.
Did you say how's it going to be paid?
Funded in cash next year in your street maintenance budget. Point number two, it will happen quicker because the council is considering funding it in that manner. We're eligible to go to work on October the 1st. We won't be paving on October 1st, but the design, the bids will actually be quite a bit ahead of the bond process. It's coming.
Cash.
Cash.
Thank you. Good explanation. Thank you, Mayor.
Before I go to Mr. Christian, I think it's also worth pointing out, Mr. Chavez, that we're also doing projects with the county on South Indiana
Correct.
and West 50th.
Yes,
Is that correct? That's it. That's the sum for now. Is that correct?
for now.
Yeah.
And prior year on South University.
That's correct.
Oh, and I do have to extend a thank you to
Yeah.
the county as well. Much appreciated.
Thank you, Mr. Chavez. Mr. Christian.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I also thank the committee for the work they've done on this. And as I've said before, that I'm also a proud graduate of Mr. Griffith's road crew, and I have my road scholar certificate promptly, displayed at my home. So thank you very much. But seriously, that was a great experience. What we do about 3 or 4 days, something like that, when we drove all the roads in the city limits of Lubbock. And it was quite an eye opener as to what the magnitude of streets and roads and boulevards, for that matter, that we have in Lubbock, Texas. It's a monumental task to keep those just maintained, and Wood and his crew do a great job of that. And one of the things that I've had several emails on, and not a whole lot, is why we didn't break out the Broadway portion of this bond. And I'll have to give credit to Mr. Massengale for this. What I'm about to say is that, in my opinion, that this Broadway project is just as important as the 114th Street project that's in my district. We've been talking about Broadway for many years, and pardon the pun, but kicking the can down the road for a long time. Broadway is an important part of our community, is an important part of the continuation of downtown redevelopment. And I'm glad to see it on this bond package, because I know that when we do decide exactly what that's going to look like, it's going to be beautiful. It's going to be attractive to a lot of people. I think it will stimulate more, and make Broadway and downtown much more livable. The livability is what we're shooting for, to get more people to move downtown and make that their home. I'm really proud that as a council that we decided not to cave into that recommendation and pull it off as a separate entity or part of the bond election. So once again, Broadway is going to get its day, and it's long overdue. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Christian. Okay, so one point of information, a couple comments, and then we'll consider this item. We will work as a council before the election to firm up what Broadway is going to look like. That's a council decision. As you know, we made that policy decision last year. I think the Future Needs Committee will have a recommendation for us on that pretty quickly, and so citizens will know what they're getting. I mean, it's interesting at the bond election and Mr. Owen and Ms. Ward made interesting comments about debt and voting and not voting. It's there's parts of the community that they think we should vote on everything. I mean, on every item, including even public works projects. There's some that say we're elected to make these decisions and we should issue this debt and go forward. It shouldn't even wait. Time is of the essence. I think we've sort of found a way to strike the right balance. I think the $27 million, $28 million worth of COs are for immediate needs and for certainly public safety is a big part of that. And I think citizens should vote. We have 1,300 plus miles of streets, as I recall. Isn't that correct, Mr. Griffith? It's the largest investment we have. When you look at what we've invested in those streets, we need to keep working on those. And even though a number of these are for streets that will be expanded when they're built, some of these are for streets that are sorely in need of replacement. Parts of Broadway are 100 years old. 34th Street has for nearly 70 years, I guess, more than 70 years, been a key east-west connector through the heart of our community. I think we appreciate the growth in parts of our community with what we're doing on the west side and the northwest side and the south side of the community. But that's not forsaking work in parts of our community that have been here for a long, long time. And so I'm excited to put it to the voters. My guess is we'll never get, I know we have to say that we think it'll be 2.1 cents. My guess is it'll never get to 2.1 cents. I mean, that would assume that our growth assumptions are fairly conservative. If you look back at the last 36 months, and we told you the public safety increase would take 3 cents. It took 2 cents. We've already lowered the rate below that spot we started with that. So we'll do it with the very best of, and with the citizens, best interest in mind. It's not lost on me what Ms. Ward said about what happened some nearly 20 years ago, where dollars were voted for something and not spent on that. And this council I think has and will remain committed to honoring what we've said we will do. So I have nothing else to add. Anything else, council? Ms. Joy?
I think we would be remiss if we didn't mention that the Broadway project has the connectivity that we need in this community. That Broadway doesn't stop at Avenue E or A. Broadway continues on into the eastern part of our city. And I think that's very important. I think we need to do that because we are a community. And so that connectivity is extremely important by extending those improvements all the way to Canyon Lakes Drive.
Yeah, great point. Okay, council, we have a motion and a second on the floor to approve on first reading to call a bond election on the uniform election day in November. I think that's on Tuesday, the 2nd of November this year, if I recall correctly. If there's no further discussion, I'll ask for a vote. All those in favor of that motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed by that very same sign? Motion carries 7-0. Thank you, council. Thank you, Future Needs Committee. We'll now move to item 3 on our agenda today. It's to continue our budget workshop. Council, you'll recall that we are in book 3 of our budget workshop presentations. Mr. Koslich sent out an amended version of this just a little while ago. It has one extra slide in it, and it's going back and catching and having some discussion around the business park TIF, where we asked for some numbers to be looked at yesterday. We asked yesterday that be looked at, and that's been done. So if I've got it right on this one, Mr. Atkinson, we'll start with we're going to hear from LEDA Market Lubbock, LEDA Visit Lubbock, it's the Sports Authority, and then we're going to hear from Civic Lubbock.
Correct.
Before we do that, however, Mr. Osborne's just ready to go. He just drove in from San Angelo so he could be here in time for this. But before we do that, let's you want to go back and catch our to-do list from yesterday? You want to do that now? Okay, I'll let you run through that, please.
Thank you, Mayor, Council. Couple of follow-up items that have come out over the last day, and then not to do it now, but I'll mention our follow-up list that we'll do after we hear from our component units today. A question was asked yesterday about current vacancies here at the city. So all in across the entire 2,304, I believe, total workforce. Right now we have 204 vacancies. That's all departments, Lubbock Power and Light, all in. Of that 204, 151 of those are not police and fire. So 151. So if you want to look at it in percentages, going back to the total, we have about 8.8% vacancy right now. That's our understaffed number. And if you look at only the not police and fire, it's 10.5. That number is higher than it typically is. We've had lots of turnover, and as we talked about, despite high unemployment, it's been difficult to attract and keep candidates. So that'll answer that. Any questions on that? And I'll move to one more.
Please continue.
Thank you. Council, I asked your permission to work back into the budget that late arriving certification pay for the fire station. That's the Cancer Prevention Group, fire station number 4. Again, as a reminder, that's roughly a $54,000 cost. I did not identify to you a source for those dollars. So the source for that will be a literal fractional adjustment to the sales tax revenue estimate that we have put in place. And that will easily cover it. And that's actually out by several decimal points to be able to do that. The third item I had on that would have been the discussion about North University. We've covered that previously. Would speak to it again if there are any questions. We owed information back, an adjustment back to you on the Lubbock Business Park TIF model that is in this presentation. So we'll cover that in a bit. And then just to keep it on everybody's table, after we finish today, we go into the wrap-up discussion, your opportunity to give us kind of those final pieces of guidance. We have an open discussion going on the water rates, on the funding for the elevated storage tank, the second water tower, and also a discussion on the proposed comprehensive fiscal analysis, which is in the capital budget for that. Council, I think that has the list either answered or teed up to be answered. And
okay, and we'll take those last 4 at the end of this
Yes.
meeting, but most of that discussion will happen in we'll talk about calendar of what we're doing next, starting next Tuesday.
we have
But
two calendar
I know
items
that
for you.
Mr. Griffith's got an item on one of those that he wants to go in a little bit more depth on this afternoon. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Any questions on that, council? Okay. So once we go through these presentations, and we'll come back to those pending items, see if there's anything else to add, have maybe a bit of discussion around those, knowing that we have several more scheduled opportunities to dialogue that in public.
That is
Okay.
correct.
Okay. All right. So let's go to our component units. And this will start on page 4 with the Lubbock Economic Development Agency operating and capital budget. Mr. John Osborne is here for that. Mr. Osborne. Mr. Osborne, there's a button on the front of that.
It's at the base of the microphone there, John.
It was turned off.
Is up here. Thank you.
We don't want you just to start pushing buttons. So that's why we had Bob come fly to the rescue right there. So
I have people tell me I push their buttons a little too much. So, yeah. Mayor and council, thank you all for allowing me to be here today. I appreciate it very much. The last 2 years have been pretty interesting for us as an organization and us as a community as it relates to economic development and tourism. And it's been a real challenge to get everything to line up exactly perfectly with what we think might happen as it relates to a budget and what will take place over the next roughly 18 months. And so you'll see that we obviously in the slide there that our budget for 2021 is of particular numbers and then what we're proposing for this next year. But I'd be remiss if I didn't say that there are some things that have worked out in our favor for this year, and there's some things that didn't. And so some of the funds that we thought we might need to expend this year, we just didn't need to because those projects did not materialize like we thought they were going to. So I'm kind of diving into it. Some of the big changes that you'll see in this particular budget, right away, you'll see that there is a grant from Market Lubbock to LEDA. This Market Lubbock is our sister organization that our board and myself help manage. And this is the first time that we've done a grant from Market Lubbock to LEDA in probably 6 or so years, maybe even a little longer than that. We've been traditionally keeping funds this last 6 to 8 years in Market Lubbock for projects that we knew were materializing in Market Lubbock that we needed the dollars there for. But we have picked up on a particular couple of projects in LEDA that we feel like for the next 5 years that we would like to restore those grants from Market Lubbock to LEDA to help assist in our cash flow processes for these specific projects. We don't at this moment anticipate it lasting longer than the 5 years, but that's a long ways out in the economic development world. One other item of note is that in our revenue sources, last year we had the TIF reimbursement. That project helped us open up Amazon here in just actually probably about 30 days. I think September 1 is when they're planning to be operational. And it's an exciting project that we could not have done without the TIF reimbursement. We have another building also being built at the exact same time that should be available for lease or sale in September as well. And that it mostly completes our infrastructure in the northern part of the park. We do have one deep sewer line that we need to continue to do, but for the most part, we're relatively complete on the northern part of the park. And we don't anticipate in this next year needing to do any other infrastructure improvements in the business park at this moment, given the fact that we have lots that are available and we'll continue to try to steer clients to those lots. We did acquire some land in this last year, and we intend to use that land as a potential incentive for a project if we can get it to materialize. If not, we'll continue to utilize it for a future opportunity. And so that's where that use of non-cash assets, we anticipate that project taking place either later this calendar year or first of next. Looking at our expenses, kind of the major items. The marketing and promotions expense you see is up fairly significantly, but it's actually back to what the normal levels are for what our budgets are. We anticipate with COVID mostly going away. Obviously, the Delta variant is still there, but we are still seeing some real opportunities, and we're trying to be prepared with our marketing efforts and sales efforts. There's a few other kind of negligible changes that are in there. The big significant changes would be that our capital outlay is down fairly significantly. And most of that is because we had some things that didn't materialize that were where we didn't need to spend some dollars. And then also that those projects have gone on. And then also South Plains College on our special projects, we will have finished with our payments to them to help them with their restoration of the old City Hall by the end of this fiscal year. And so that's where you see that those payments are down as well. I'm happy to address any other questions that you have on our LEDA budget.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Osborne. Questions on the LEDA budget? I know a number of us had a chance to see this at the LEDA board meeting last week, I guess. But council, you have any comments or questions, Mr. Osborne? Okay, please continue, Mr. Osborne.
Moving on to Market Lubbock. Within Market Lubbock, the big change as it relates to our expense side of things is obviously we are bringing the $1 million grant back over to LEDA. And so you'll see that payment is there. We have had to make some minor adjustments in our downtown and east side grants as a whole for the amount of funding that we're putting together there. And just had to make it come down just a little bit. And that was primarily because of the total cash that we have in reserves and available to us. I don't think that will be super materialistic, given that it's pretty rare for us to have to grant every single dollar out of that program. We are anticipating it being altogether still fairly significant and should be able to account for what our needs are for this next year. We are up in some of our marketing efforts. That's primarily related to the marketing of downtown and some of the activities that are taking place there. We're down in some of our incentive payments, and that's because some of the incentives for projects that we've had previously have now rolled off. Most specifically, that was for Bear Crop Science back when they were Bear, now BASF. I'm glad to address any questions that you might have.
I was noticing, Mr. Osborne, you could probably talk to a little bit better, but those both downtown and east side grant projects are they're now, I guess, long-term. You've made commitments to them over many years. What's the typical payback on it for every dollar of Market Lubbock funds? What are you seeing in private investment?
Oh, I just saw that number. Janet, do you happen to recall off the top of your head what that was? I need to get back to you on that. I'll get it to Jared and allow you. I have it in my head this last year. It was $16 for every dollar that was spent in downtown.
I think that's about right. I know. I think it's been the low maybe of $11.
Yeah.
One year it was, I think, close to $40 of
Yes.
private investment for every Market Lubbock dollar invested. So
Yes, sir.
it seems to me it's has spurred some activity and seems to have been a pretty good investment.
I saw Jorge, who handles that whole grant program for us on our staff. He did a presentation the other day that I was watching, and he did kind of a run through of where these projects are located. And it's throughout the entire district. It's not just one specific area. It's pretty incredible, the amount of activity that's now taking place as a result of the assistance of these grant projects, along with the other catalytic projects that are going on in downtown. And so I think it is definitely meeting, it's satisfying the reason why we put the grant program together initially, which was to help spur revitalization faster, to incentivize people to come downtown and to begin working towards revitalizing downtown.
Thank you, Mr. Osborne. Ms. Joy.
Mr. Osborne, there are other parts of the city that are in decline
Yes, ma'am.
other than downtown and East Lubbock. So what is your plan for utilization of these tax dollars that come from all over the city for the future?
Yeah, so at the moment, we've actually had to decrease the amount of funds that we have available for this program downtown because of all of the needs within the organization and with all of the projects that we've got going on. We still feel that there's a need to continue with the downtown investment from an incentive standpoint to encourage investment to continue on. I don't know that that's a program that needs to be in place, say, in 7 years. That at some point in time, and we evaluate it every single year, we look at it and see, is it time now to kind of roll that program off and change where we invest those dollars, and then look at a different area of town would be the appropriate point at that point. One of the reasons why we've invested these dollars specific to downtown is because there's a significant amount of population that is very interested in downtown, in a revitalized downtown, most specifically the Gen Y and Gen Z population base. And while it could, be other generations that also want to see it, those two specifically now make up the majority of our workforce, not just in Lubbock, but in Texas and in the United States. And so in order to help attract workforce to our community, we need a revitalized downtown, and to ensure that companies can hire the type of people that they want to hire. We wanted to make sure that this effort took on faster than it would normally do if we were not encouraging it to take place.
Other questions, Mr. Osborne? Mr. Griffith?
John, if you don't mind going back to, if we go back to LEDA.
Yes, sir.
Apologize.
No, that's all right.
Left that component, but you brought up the South Plains College.
Yes, sir.
Campus. How many dollars are we talking about in that project?
The total project to do the renovation is, I believe, $15 million. And then I don't know what South Plains College bids came in at, but that was what they felt like it was going to take to do that whole project. We were able to raise a total of $17 million to assist with that. LEDA gave $10 million. The other 7 came from the CH Foundation. The difference of that 15 million and 17 million is that the city of Lubbock was reimbursed $2 million for selling that property to South Plains College. And then because that project, South Plains College is actually funded through property taxes in Hockley County and not in Lubbock at all. And so the only way that they could get the support of their constituents for this project was if their tax dollars in Hockley County weren't coming over for that project. So it takes just a little while for the state to reimburse the college when it starts up a new campus or center, and based on the number of students that are going through. So we do have an incentive program to help with their admin costs over the next 6 years. And that is, I believe, $300,000 a year to help with that. No, I'm sorry. Is it 300? I think it's 300,000 a year to help with that. And that's so that the payments from the state can start to come in for the number of students that are going to be attending the college. They plan to be open in the fall of 2022, and they expect 2,500 students to be in there. The other project that we helped them with was down on Avenue Q with a technical training center, and that exceeded their expectations in terms of number of students going through. That project's done very, very well.
Thank you for the explanation.
Yes, sir.
I agree that project is fantastic.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Osborne, before we go to visit Lubbock, I'd like to remind council, staff, and citizens to please, if you've not, to silence your cell phones. Okay, Mr. Osborne, if you'd take us through the Visit Lubbock budget, operating and capital budget.
So Visit Lubbock is almost the hardest entity for us to project at the moment, given that we are asking people that don't live here to travel here. And you're dealing with traveler sentiment. You're dealing with companies that don't think that travel is necessary anymore, associations that are meeting online, sporting groups with families that basically said, we're going to travel no matter what. and we will find a place to meet. And so it's been an interesting kind of challenge. This last year, we felt like as things were improving, that we would be able to, and opening up, that we would be able to take advantage of that and get more groups to come. And yet it's actually been much harder than we anticipated to win over deals. So much of our budget in this next upcoming year is related to what we feel like is going to be necessary to continue to sell Lubbock and encourage people to come and to travel to Lubbock. So you'll see that the hotel occupancy it was down in 2020 as a calendar year, primarily because it did not get the V-shaped recovery that everybody else had. It had much more of an L-shaped recovery, which took a lot longer to kind of come back to normal. But as of this calendar year is closer to 2019 numbers for all intents and purposes, and most feel like things are in a much better spot there. So looking at our revenues, you'll see that those dollars are definitely coming in more. We've continued to restore our marketing and efforts back to kind of normal levels that we would be doing in that case. So while it looks like it's up significantly, it's actually a fairly common number that we've been doing. And I should say that we don't always spend every single dollar in that line item. We take advantage of opportunities as we see fit, but we definitely have to have that in the budget in order to be able to be a bit more nimble. And then obviously the incentives is up fairly significantly. We do have one event that we've been trying to get that would be a very wonderful event to bring to our community. Our community would be hugely supportive of it, but it is a much more expensive event to attract. We're still going after it. We have not yet won that deal. And so that's one reason why that line item is more significant this year than in typical past. Lubbock Sports is really kind of a part of that same budget, if you don't mind.
Why don't you cover it at the same time?
you.
That'd be great.
Sports is actually where we've seen increases much quicker than anywhere else. And part of that's because the state of New Mexico remained shut down up until here recently. And all those sports families basically said, we want to travel, we want to compete. And little Johnny and little Jane, they need their opportunities to participate in sports. And so they did. They continued to come over here and participate. So you'll see that we actually supplement our Lubbock Sports dollars actually with Visit Lubbock monies, and that's with good reason because sporting events have such a major impact on our community, and we want to continue to bring sporting events here. Most recently, we had USA Boxing here the week of July 4th. And that while that was a more costly event to bring in, those are your future Olympians you'll see on the television in 4 or 8 years or both. And they were extremely pleased with how hospitable our community was and are already asking what year can they come back sometime in the next 3 years. So you'll see that they kind of flow together. We do marketing for just sports, we do marketing for Visit Lubbock, and we do marketing for both.
Okay, so questions on Visit Lubbock and Lubbock Sports Authority, pages 6 and 7 of our budget presentation. Mr. Christian.
On sports, any update on any tournaments or additional sporting events that would be coming the remainder of this year, maybe even some that are looking at us for next year?
And we're getting close to the end of the season for the travel tournaments being the 1st of August. With schools opening up earlier and earlier, it makes it really difficult for tournaments to be held in August. We had Premier this last week. I don't know of one this week. Can't think of one off the top of my head. But oftentimes this first week or 10 days or so of August, they'll continue to have a baseball tournament or something along those lines. But it really winds down rapidly. It will pick back up in September once every school kind of gets going again and everything gets started. And we'll have September and October events, and then it'll start to wind down again until roughly about March. And in March, it will pick up significantly.
Thank you, Mr. Christian. What kind of, John, what kind of feedback and results are you seeing from the investments made at Borough Huffman?
Well, I'm excited that we have just won a huge tournament, and forgive me if I can't remember the name of it, but if you'll allow me to just describe it. So Texas Tech has a women's varsity team. They also have a men's club team. And so there's a kind of different levels of sports. The varsity team for women's would offer scholarships, whereas the men's club team would not, because it's a club team, but they still travel. And we just recently worked with them to pitch Borough Huffman for the championships of that club version from both men's and women's, and that we were selected. Forgive me if I can't recall the year, but they will be utilizing Borough Huffman and then also Texas Tech's stadium,
John Walker
Yes, sir.
Complex. Yes.
To hold that tournament. But had we not had that, Borough Huffman, we would not have been able to go after that particular event. Borough Huffman, it was interesting. If you look back in June when the governor started allowing travel again, Borough Huffman was one of the first places we saw any visitors. Immediately we saw kids on the field. And in fact, because you're outdoors and you could spread out a little more, it made it easier actually for events to be held. And it was great to see that particular tournament. I remember Scott telling me that over 75% of the clubs that came for that particular tournament were from out of town. They're extremely excited about that, and it's a fantastic facility.
Thank you, Mr. Osborne. Council questions for Mr. Osborne? Okay, John, thank you very much.
Thank you very
We
much.
appreciate it. All right, Council, page 8 has the Civic Lubbock Inc. operating and capital budget for FY22. I think, Raphael, you going to come up and cover this? Mr. Gutierrez is the board chair for Civic Lubbock Inc. Raphael, thank you for what you do, and thanks for being with us today. You're becoming a sort of a regular guest here. Should we add you to the agenda for all of our meetings?
No, thank you. Thank
Okay.
you, sir.
All right,
Thank
just
you for the
checking.
offer.
All right.
No,
All right.
that's all right. Good afternoon, Mayor, Council, and staff. Thank you for the opportunity today to present to you our budget for Civic Lubbock Inc. First, let me start off by saying, as a board member and as a Lubbock citizen, I'm grateful and proud of the response of our city leaders and the action that they took in designating the Civic Center as initial hub in combating COVID-19 and utilizing it as a venue for administering the vaccine. Those actions and the benefit of those actions are not lost on our board or our citizens. Onto our budget. CLI has historically been conservative in budgeting and continues with our approach this upcoming fiscal year. And it is with cautious optimism we anticipate a return of events in this post-vaccine era. Some of the actions that we took in our current fiscal year to help balance our budget: a reduction of all of our part-time staff members and one full-time staff member. Expenses were frozen. Accounting for ticketing revenue was deferred for all postponed events. During last year, many events were postponed. Some situations required refunds. So all of that revenue on our books has continuously been deferred. CLI has also applied for a PPP loan, and we anticipate full forgiveness. But even with those actions, our budget for this current fiscal year, our revenue, we are anticipating to fall slightly short, even with those actions. Any shortfall will be supplemented with our unrestricted net position. But hopefully, coming into our new fiscal year of 2022, we anticipate events to return to the Civic Center. And so far, July has been very strong. August appears to be slightly slower, but that's historically the case. September will help us close in on our gap of revenue for this current fiscal year, but probably not meet it. Again, it is with cautious optimism that we enter into our fiscal year 2022. The Civic Center still faces challenges with hiring, just like all of our institutions and businesses here in Lubbock. We have also increased our hourly starting rate to help draw those individuals in, because again, we are anticipating future events to take place and we want to be fully staffed for when that does happen. And I believe that is all I have for you today. I'll take any questions.
Questions for Mr. Gutierrez? I thought it was interesting in the paper on Sunday, just more of a comment, but you may have seen the article that ran on the probably you, not you, Raphael, you're probably too young to get the paper at home, but the section B, there was an article about the history of the Auditorium and Coliseum and the playbill that it showed. It featured prominently brought to you by Civic Lubbock. Many of our citizens don't realize that it goes back to just some recent, the 50s, I believe, is
65 years.
Yeah, 65 years. And so legacy of helping support the arts in our community and something that we're thankful for. We also, I see you're joined by your able sidekick over there.
Ms. Rita Holmes.
If I don't recognize her, Mr. Maskey and I both might get a phone call. So Renita Woods Holmes, who served our community for so many years in so many ways, thank you for serving along with Mr. Gutierrez.
It's great to serve with her as well.
Yes, Ms. Patterson Harris.
I just wanted to add to that is that Ms. Vanita Woods Holmes is a member of District 2.
Duly noted. Okay, anything else for Mr. Gutierrez? Mr. Massico.
I just want to tell Mr. Gutierrez, thanks. I believe that's the only budget presentation we've had from a volunteer. And so again, I made a comment last time. I appreciate your service and appreciate your willingness to get up here during budget session and present to us. So thanks for taking the time.
Thank you. Thank you all. I appreciate what y'all have done by putting these on YouTube. That helped me prepare and eased any fears that I had.
All right. Thank you. Appreciate it. Okay, council, that takes care of everything except the updated business park TIF financial model, and you'll find it on page 10. Mr. Cossett, you want to run through that with us real quick, the changes you made?
Absolutely, Mayor. Be happy to. So really not much is going to change when you look at fiscal year 21-22. The way this works is the two buildings that were in discussion yesterday, those really started gaining speed, gaining momentum in this calendar year. So because the buildings and everything, because those valuations are set on January 1st of 2021, we won't see what actually hits the rolls on these buildings until January 1st, 2022, which will go into our next year's budget. So that's where you're going to see the big change on fiscal year 23 in total tax collections. That's what we anticipate coming on from these two buildings alone. So flowing that all the way down, nothing has changed on your reserves, your total revenues, expenditures on 22. 23 is where you see that total revenue over expenses come up from what it was about $400,000 or $500,000 to that $1 million mark.
All right, that looks much more like what I think it jives. It comes a lot closer to some of the planning we've seen on Mr. Osborne's budget, future budget planning too, because I know some of these revenues will likely be used for capital investment at the business park, much like we did last year.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. Questions on this one, council?
Thanks for updating it.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Okay. So I think that concludes our budget work. We've gone through the prepared slides. Let's go back and Mr. Atkinson, let's go back to your those items you mentioned, and I think we'll start with I think the last one was related to the software. Is that correct?
To the study, the comprehensive analysis.
Right. Fiscal analysis. I'm sorry. Well, explain what that is.
And I'll just do a quick version of it.
High level would be
It's
perfect.
a fiscal analysis tool that evaluates all pieces of both the cost and the revenue related to a new development or to a redevelopment.
Right. Okay. Mr. Griffith.
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you, Jarrett, for the explanation. my concern, council, mayor, with this particular item isn't whether or not to do it. My concern is because I feel like that there's more explanation needed before we go into utilization of this. So my ask, council and mayor, is to keep this item as a placeholder, but not to act on it yet.
So what I think you're saying is let's not go spend the money, put it, sort of hold it in reserve. Maybe it'd be appropriate that in December, when we review do our annual look back at the Plan Lubbock 2040, that we could revisit it at that time. Do you think that would be a good time to do that, Mr.
Yes,
Griffith?
please. And exactly, because again, as stated yesterday, it was part of the recommendation on Plan 2040. So I think it fits then, but I believe that more study needs to be done to understand the free market considerations this could have.
All right, council, you've heard Mr. Griffith's recommendation. You okay with that? Ms. Patterson Harris.
Thank you. I'm not sure if I am. Number one, as stated, it is a part of the 2040 plan, but also has been something that has been pushed by the citizens within the city. And I'm just curious as to where the oversight committee would stand on whether or not to push this off anytime. That's a concern for me.
Right. You're talking about the CPOC, Ms. Patterson Harris?
Yes, sir.
Right. Well, I think this would give us a chance to talk to them and
Yeah.
to do that. If we want to bring it back to the budget after doing so, we could do that. I think it's prudent to go that route.
Yeah,
good with
I was just saying, instead of just jumping and saying, let's push it to a certain point, we may hear from them something that will cause for us to bring it up sooner than that. So I don't want to necessarily put a timeline to say.
That's fine. That's fine. If we get to it before that, that's fine, but we'll pull it off the budget, hold it and hold the money, and then make a decision at a later date.
I'm not, say that again. Maybe I didn't hear that correctly.
Mr. Atkins, you want to explain that? You and I talked about this a little earlier.
Yeah, I think we have two ways to do it. One would be to pull it out of the CIP, put those dollars back into the reserve account and not use them until the council says so. The other might be to let's just retitle that for future plans and analysis, leave the dollars there. Once the council's had a chance to go back over that in detail, it's been several years since a discussion was held on it. If you choose to activate it, it's already there. We can go either way with it.
I think I like the latter.
Mr. Griffith.
And I'm fine with that. I'm not saying eliminate the item. I'm just saying don't act on it promptly as soon as I believe that more discussion needs to be had by this body. And to your point, Ms. Patterson Harris, we need to hear from CPOC. But there's a whole lot of tools that can be used. This particular tool, I believe, needs definitely more discussion by this panel.
Okay, well, we'll leave it there. Before we move on it, we'll just make certain that it's got to come back to council for approval on that.
Yeah.
It would anyway, it would come in as a agenda item, but in this case, we'll have it will come for discussion before.
Yeah,
before
we'll
we tear it up.
retitle that, hold those dollars. They're
Yes.
still in your budget. They're still available. And then at the council's pleasure, push it.
Thank you.
All right, Mr. Atkinson, would you run through those other three items, please?
I think I've got two, unless I've confused myself on my notes, water rates and the discussion on the second of the two elevated storage tanks.
Okay, maybe there were just two. I thought you said four earlier.
Business Park TIF.
We
I
took
think
care of
pulled
that.
up
So,
into
okay,
the
so
first
that's
one.
it. So
Yes, sir.
we got two. So, okay. So we'll hold those two in suspense till our meeting on the 10th. Okay, we could have some more discussion. I think it might be valuable to tee up, since they sort of work together, it might be valuable to look at the CIP and maybe put some slides and that we could get Mr. Franklin to sort of Mr. Turpin, let us look at what the CIP looks at, 1, 2, 3, 4, up to 10, we've got it pretty far out. That would bring Cremwa 2 in there, at least best guess around that. Could even have some dollars in there for like 7. I think those would seem to be relevant to a discussion about rate and how we might spend those ARPA dollars. Council, you okay with that? Okay.
So we'll have those for work session Tuesday.
Yeah. Now, council, this is not a end all, be all end all list. If you come up with other items between now and then, we'll add it to the list. Okay. We got plenty of time. Let's take now's a good time. First of all, let me announce publicly that we will be canceling tomorrow's work session for the budget. I can see the disappointment all over the room, but we will be, we were scheduled for that just in case we needed it. So, well, we're not going to have it. So we're canceling that. I just want you to know that. And I want Mr. Atkinson to sort of work through our schedule between now and the time we will adopt this budget. Jarrett?
Just 1 second. Let me get this pulled back up here. Hey, council. So today completes the workshops. As the mayor noted, nothing has been decided. Nothing is finished. We've got 2 items. I'll call it 3: water rate, elevated storage tank, and a longer term look at the CIP for water, wastewater. You'll have that in work session on your regular meeting, Tuesday, August the 10th. There is 1 budget related item that is proposed for action on the 10th. That action item is what we used to call proposing the maximum tax rate. It is not voting on the tax rate. It is saying we, the city council, have completed the review and the maximum tax rate we would take with this budget is X. So remember, right now it's 52 cents and change. That starts then all of the statutorily required postings, publications, setting you up as we go through eventually hearings and 2 actions on adoption. You have a regular meeting on August the 24th. The budget will still remain as a work session item. You do not have a budget action on that day. You have availability for discussion. We will have 1 special meeting to satisfy the timetable in Senate Bill 2. That special meeting will be on Monday, September 7 at 5 p.m. 5 p.m. This meeting will have the required hearings. So one of the benefits that we work under these new rules is if we stay below the 3.5%, you have 1 set of hearings only rather than 2 that we used to do previously. So there'll be a hearing on the budget itself. There will be a hearing on the tax rate itself. You will announce that your second meeting is coming up. I'll do that in a moment. And you will vote on the first reading of the budget ordinance and the first reading of the tax levy ordinance. Special meeting, September 7, 5 p.m. September 14th is your regularly scheduled meeting, your first regular meeting in September. That is the second consideration of the budget ordinance and of the tax levy ordinance. That is the final action. You will have then adopted your fiscal year 23 budget. I mean, 22, excuse me, I'm jumping budget. 2, sorry, 2. You get to do it again.
Okay. So to summarize, we'll discuss at our 2 regular August meetings. We'll have a special meeting on the 7th of September. And then we'll likely, the plan is we would adopt it then at our first meeting in September on the 14th.
Correct.
Is that correct? Okay. All right. Any questions on that, council? All right. Anything else before us today? Mr. Weaver, Ms. Garza, you guys okay? All right. Mr. Atkinson, you good?
Good.
All right. Council, thank you for your time this week. Staff, thank you not only for your work this week, but for the last 6 months in putting this budget together. Once again, a thank you to Mr. Koslich and his team, who certainly lead the way on this, Ms. Brock, and many others. And then I think, thank you to our citizens who entrust us this stewardship role with all these many assets that we all rely on for our what make our community a great place. It's 3:57 p.m. Today is August the 4th, 2021. It's a great day in Lubbock, Texas, and we are adjourned.
Let's be sure we make the change